Varieties, damage, and errors. Oh my. If you're like me, terminology in a hobby can be a little bit confusing. I often find myself talking about the right thing but using the wrong language. If you do the same thing, watch this video. I think it'll help out a lot. Hey y'all, this is Frostbite. I tend to use the wrong term frequently, and because of this, a good friend of mine and mentor, Miss Paula Bloom of Livecoin Q&A, challenged me to create this video. Number one, it's a great idea for a video and goes right in line with the series that I've been doing about the differences between errors and about understanding the things that we're going to be talking about today. It also builds on the video that I did on the anatomy of a coin. Again, the fundamental tenet is to understand the minting process. Once you understand the minting process, the rest kind of falls into play. Now, because of that, we need to define the proper way, and I want to give you some examples of each one of these. And then we'll talk about how and when to use each of these terms. As I started doing this video, I did my recording and started working on video editing. And each time I would listen to it, I would find myself saying the same old thing, slightly mistaking the term for something that I had confused in the past. It was clear I needed more help. So I reached out to someone who was steeped with knowledge about this topic. I'll bring him into the discussion shortly, but I wanted to see if the information that I was going to release was on the right track. He smiled and said, "Not really." And it was very clear to me why. The best way to look at this problem is to start with the smallest set first. In order to do this, we would need to understand the smallest item, which is variety, as seen on the graphic on the screen. A great example of varieties are the type 1, type 2 buffaloes, which have either a flat or a mound underneath the buffalo, allowing room for the 5 cents. Also, the type 1 and type 2 egg dollars, small and large 8 cents, and things like mint mark changes. Now, a die variety is something that was created on the die during the process of hubbing. Another way that you would get this type of variety is by something like a repunched mint mark, called an RPM, or something like a repunched date. And on the screen, you'll see this 8/7 Morgan dollar. Now, it's very easy to confuse a die variety with a die error, and because of this, I reached out to my guest, Mr. Chuck Daughtry of Copper Coins. Chuck taught me a really cool way to categorize these errors, and that is PDS. And we're all familiar with PDS as in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. But in this case, PDS stands for something different, and that is planchet, die, and strike. It's a great way to categorize errors. So planchet errors are anything that involves the planchet prior to being minted, or during the strike to defective planchets like lamination, peels, or bubbling. Now, die errors occur on the die itself, and it's important to remember things like doubled die is not a double stamped coin or a machine doubling. You can actually see this on the die itself. It's very important to remember that. But before the die has an issue, all the coins are normal. It's after the die error that every coin struck will have the issue on it. Finally, you're going to have striking errors, which are broad struck, mules, and offset strikes. There's others, but these are just the ones I'm going to talk about now. And this could occur on a die variety. So you could have both a planchet, a die, and a striking error on the same coin. So how do you approach looking at a coin? Well, based off the information that I learned, if you look at this graphic, you want to start with the smallest thing first. In this case, it would be a variety. Whether you determine there's a variety or not doesn't mean that you stop there. It just means you go to the next point. Is there a die variety? If there's not a die variety, then is there an error? And if there's not an error, is there any damage to the coin? And if there's not any damage to the coin, then you have a normal coin. And that's why it's kind of put into this graphic. And you can see how they kind of build off of each other. but all of them are within the coin itself, and all of them can be on the coin at the same time. So with that, I'm going to turn the time back over to Chuck.
You can start with the most finite set first and then move out from there. A variety, a die variety. Well, there's actually two different things: a variety and a die variety. A variety is a change, an intended change in the design during a given issue that was not necessarily meant to be noticed, like a large date, small date, or mint mark styles, things like that make a variety. And then a die variety is doubling on the die created by the hubbing process or by punching mint marks or dates. A lot of people, including some published authors, confuse a die error for a die variety and call them the same thing. And I don't, because they are different. Uh, Die errors are things that happen to the die after it's created, after it's finished, and then hung on the press to start making coins. A die error is are things like a broken die, a cud, uh, a split die, the buy errors, the clash marks, things like that are all die errors. They're all things that didn't start out on the die, but were on the die eventually. An error would be they're generally categorized into three different slots. You have the planchet errors, the die errors, and the strike errors.
Right.
And interestingly enough, they fall in line with the mints and they're easy to remember PDS. The planchet error is anything that happened to the planchet prior to it being minted into a coin, or something that happened during the strike that was caused by a defective planchet to begin with, like lamination, peels, things like that. Die errors I just described. Die errors are anything that happens to the die during the striking process or during the process of striking coins. And then the striking error is an error that's created by the strike itself, like a brockage, an indent, broad struck coins, fold overs, flip over, double struck, things like that are all striking errors. Generally, an error is something that has some marketable value and some form of rarity that makes it collectible, makes it worth picking up. A small die crack, I don't see as having any real value. Now, sometimes people will attach a name to a die crack or a die gouge or something, and then suddenly it has quote unquote value because of that. One that I can think of is the Wounded Eagle, the Sacagawea dollars. The other one I can think of is the speared bison 2005 nickels. Little die cracks and things like that typically have no extra value. Once they start really developing into something large, like that 2021 cent that has the obverse that basically falls apart during striking, that's definitely a big error. So there's a fine line between the definitions of the two, but generally non-collectible errors is what I would call the, the minor stuff. And most of that minor stuff is within mint tolerance. So you have mint tolerance will allow for a number of things to happen that some people consider errors and collect as such, like the bubbling on the planchets, planchet, like planchet striations, things like that, slight die misalignment, where you have a very slight amount of curvature to the off center to the curvature on the outside of the rim. Struck throughs in minor amounts, grease struck throughs and struck through small obstructions and things like that. Once it gets to be a bigger thing, I think it's more a within tolerance thing that's a curiosity that people spend money for, like struck through thread or struck through wire, stuff like that. Those things are much more interesting. However, they're not necessarily considered errors by the mint because it was just part of the striking process. Something got in the die and punched into the coin. Whoop, big deal. But we consider it a bigger deal because they're scarce and because we can identify what it is and it makes a curiosity. The curiosity makes it valuable. The value makes it collectible. to back up, varieties are intended changes, die varieties are not intended doubling that's created on the die. And then errors are anything else meant created.
I can't thank Chuck enough for the time he took to help share information with me. I sincerely appreciate his time and effort. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hit that bell so you get notification of future videos that are to come. And if you haven't already done so, enter a comment down below and smash that like button. It really helps out the channel and gets my name in the algorithm. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching. This is Frostbite. Have a good night.